Okay. Welcome. This is going to be the third time that I've tabled this bill. I'm Sherry DeNovo. I'm a member of Provincial Parliament for Parkdale High Park, calling for inclusionary zoning, change to the Planning Act in Ontario so that municipalities can bring in inclusionary zoning. I'm delighted to have on the panel today two of Ontario's foremost housing experts and advocates. We have Michael Shapcott to my right. He's the Director of Housing and Innovation at the Wellesley Institute. And to my left, we have Dr. David Holshansky, who is Professor of Factor in Wentash, Faculty of Social Work, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Dr. Chow Yi Ching, Chair in Housing at the University of Toronto. So I'm delighted to have both of these gentlemen with me talking about housing, which, needless to say, we've fallen behind on in the province. Michael.
My name is Michael Shapcott with the Wellesley Institute. We're a research and policy institute dedicated to advancing urban health. One of the things that we know that's fundamental both to individual health and to the social and economic health of communities is a good supply of affordable housing. In 2006, the Wellesley Institute launched a project we called the Blueprint to End Homelessness in Toronto, and as part of that, we wanted to look at how other municipalities were increasing the supply of good quality affordable housing. As we looked across the United States, we were intrigued to discover that literally hundreds, in those days more than 350 United States municipalities, large and small, were using a practice known as inclusionary housing as a way of increasing affordable housing in their communities. We convened a conference. We brought in 3 leading U.S. experts from Washington, from Boston, from Chicago, had over 100 municipal housing officials and planning officials from across Ontario. We really dug deeply into the question of what is inclusionary housing, how is it working in the United States, and what are the lessons for Ontario. And here's a couple of things that we learned. We learned, first of all, that while the basic mechanisms of inclusionary housing vary from municipality to municipality, there's some common features. Typically, an inclusionary housing mechanism will require that private developers, when they build a new development, include a fixed percentage of affordable housing. This is different than the current provisions in Ontario's Planning Act, Section 37 of the Planning Act, which have a kind of let's make a deal approach where every housing project is negotiated separately. So there's some certainty that is brought in by inclusionary housing. What it does is create that fixed percentage. But the experience in the United States is that you have to make sure that there's still a financial incentive for developers to continue to develop. So there are a number of different financial incentives that are offered throughout the United States. Typically, density bonusing is the major incentive that's used. We collected all those experiences together in a paper which we published along with Acorn Canada with the help of the Catherine Donnelly Foundation, called A Guide to Developing Inclusionary Housing Programs. The biggest factor, however, that's preventing the adoption of this very successful practice from the United States here in Canada is a 1991 Ontario Municipal Board decision involving a bylaw that the City of Burlington passed to create an inclusionary housing strategy for that city. And way back in 1991, the Ontario Municipal Board ruled that the City of Burlington didn't have the necessary provincial authority in order to proceed. So ever since then, the law has basically said that these cannot proceed unless there is specific provincial authority. So the bill that Sherry DeNovo is bringing forward is a very simple, it's very elegant, but it's a critically important bill because it gives municipalities the authority to adopt a mechanism that will actually work for their community. Now, I want to finally deal with a couple of questions. One is, do municipalities really want this power from the provincial government? And I'll refer to a letter on April 12, 2010 from the Regional Planning Commissioners of Ontario. This represents the 19 largest municipalities across the province, all the upper-tier municipalities, in which they write to the Ministry of Housing, writing in support of inclusionary housing, and they note that they've written previously on December 21st, 2009, April 24th, 2009, March 26, 2008, April 6, 2006, and that they've cited this in policy papers going back to 2004. So municipalities clearly are saying to the provincial government, give us this power for us to adopt mechanisms that will work in our community to ensure that we can harness the power of new development to create mixed income housing. So the final question is, what will this mean in practical terms for Ontario? Well, we We can't say for sure exactly the number of new homes that would be created under a province-wide inclusionary housing policy, because of course the mechanisms would vary from municipality to municipality, and it depends on the amount of new housing that's under construction. But let's take the year 2010 or 2011. There were roughly 62,000 new homes that were completed across Ontario. If municipalities in Ontario had the power to enact inclusionary housing regulations, and if they had enacted, say, a rule similar to the one that's been in place for 30 years in Montgomery County, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., it's widely considered to be a model inclusionary housing bylaw, we would have generated about 12,000 affordable homes a year under that policy. So we're talking about a substantial difference. And I think this underlines the main reason why we need inclusionary housing legislation in Ontario. The main reason is that in Ontario, our problem is not that we're not building enough housing, it's that we're not building the right mix of housing. And Sherry DeNovo's bill will help us to ensure that municipalities have the tools to create that right mix. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. David?
Yeah, thank you. I'm here because I, of course, teach and do research on these subjects, and I'm involved in various organizations. In addition to what Michael has outlined, the important issue of providing affordable housing and mixed housing instead of just one type of housing, which is what the market is doing by itself, an unregulated market. There's another reason. We all know about the growing income gap between rich and poor in our country, in our cities, throughout the province. And what is happening is that where people live is increasingly becoming segregated on the basis of their income. It's their socioeconomic status. Higher education, the more likelihood of having higher income. And so we have whole parts of the city now that are purely high income, and whole parts of the city that are becoming purely low income. And this is happening to a number of successful jurisdictions and cities in the Western world because of that growing gap between rich and poor. So what inclusionary zoning says is that indeed, developers, you mainly only build in the high income parts of the city. We understand that. But when you build, include a certain percentage, and it's left open here. It's up to each city to work out what works best for them. But you can begin to reverse this trend of segregating people by income. So I've been part of a large team, and I'm continuing to do this kind of study where we, in fact, identify what's happening to cities. And we know in the city of Toronto, for example, about 20% of the city's neighborhoods are extremely high income. And it's in that 20% where most of the condominiums that have been built in the last 10 years have been built. And if they had 10 or 15% mix, some kind of rental, some kind of affordable housing in there, those neighborhoods would be slightly more mixed. So some people often ask, well, what is so good about socially mixed neighborhoods? That's a hard argument or hard issue to bring evidence to, but the opposite is easy to talk about, that not being mixed is wrong. So having whole neighborhoods full of low-income people, having whole neighborhoods full of just very high-income people mean that the kids there grow up in a very isolated world, not knowing the realities of daily life in our country, and likewise people going to work and all the resources that are available are very different in those parts of the city. So this is one important planning tool that we should have had a long time ago. We've been talking about it as planners for a long time, and decades we know about this. So it's about time that Ontario allows cities to do this. Not all cities need to do it, not all will want to do it, but this gives them the authority to do it. And it simply doesn't cost anything. It just says that if we're going to give away zoning, higher density for very large projects, there's got to be some give back to the community and help build a better community. That's what this bill calls for.
Thank you, David. And just to add my voice, as I said, this is the third time this bill has been tabled. A couple of key points, and I'm going to build on what David said. Number one, it doesn't cost a tax dime, but does provide up to 12,500 new units of housing a year. And keep in mind that's against a backdrop in Ontario. Last I checked, we had an affordable housing list of families waiting of about 160,000 families across the province, and an average waiting of 10 to 12 years for affordable housing units. This is obviously completely unacceptable. Housing is really one of the prime drivers behind our poverty rates right now in Ontario, which have never been worse. So housing is a way to get people out of poverty. This is a way of providing housing without costing the government anything. I want to emphasize that point, without costing the government anything. And it's not a prescriptive bill, it's an enabling bill, which is to say that it doesn't force anyone or any municipality to bring in inclusionary zoning. All it does is get the Ontario Municipal Board out of the way so that if a municipality does want to bring in inclusionary zoning, they have the ability to do so. We farmed this bill out around the province. We heard back from municipalities. Almost all of them either passed resolutions or came back and said, yes, we want the ability to be able to do that, which is different from saying we want to do that. Just the ability to be able to think about doing that. Not a lot to ask. And quite frankly, when you look south of the border, this has been the main driver behind any affordable housing that's been provided in the United States. And we look at Atlanta, San Francisco, Boston, Washington, Colorado. In Canada, we have it in Vancouver. So it does exist, and it does provide housing for states that are very cash-strapped in the United States. And when I meet with American legislators, this is the tool that they use. It's the only tool they have, really, in many instances, to provide affordable housing. So those are critical points, I think, that people need to realize. And again, that inclusionary housing can look like a lot of different things. It could be rent to own. It can be density bonusing, where, for example, a developer is going to build a 23-story tower. The city decides they'll give them the 24th, as long as the 10 units that would be on that floor, let's say, are affordable. They could be passed through the building. Again, it could be this inclusionary zoning strategies could look as different as the municipalities that bring them in. The bottom line, however, is that we would be providing housing units. Right now, as we are probably aware, certainly anybody in this area of activism is aware, that both the provincial and the federal governments have really got out of the business providing affordable housing at all. And that's sad. We in the New Democratic Party had, as part of our platform, 10,000 new bills a year, new bills. And that's an expensive proposition, but we feel that's important. But this is an added tool because, again, this doesn't cost anything, and along with some new bills would actually be the beginning of the solution to our problem. So that's it. The bill will be tabled as soon as it can be. Right now the House is seized with other business, but as soon as this bill can be tabled, it will be tabled and hopefully up for debate at some point soon. Thank you very much for watching. And thank you, David, and thank you, Michael.
Oh, thanks.